Hey, welcome back to Paragliding Banter, guys, and thank you for joining in and being part of this podcast. Today, I'm really excited, extremely excited, in fact, and very happy to have someone who's a pretty well-known name in the paragliding circles. Um, he really doesn't need any introduction, but I have to make a little bit of a small attempt myself to do justice to his introduction. Well, he's a 3 times British champion. He was first as a PWC in Turkey in 2009, second in the Super Finals 2009, second in the PWC Colombia 2011, third in Super Finals 2012, and third in European 2012. There's obviously a lot more here, but I couldn't dig up more because he's pretty elusive that way. But he is a name to be reckoned in the flying circles. He's currently the test pilot at Ozone in France. He's extremely approachable and a fabulous all-round guy. He's got a huge fan following here in India. And in fact, I was told that, please approach him and he'll be easy to talk to. And we just started speaking and he is. Rightly so. So please help me welcome Russel Ogden. Welcome, Russ or Russell, to Paragliding Banter.
Thank you. Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Awesome. It's pleasure's all ours, man. I want to give a shout out to Krishan Kant, or KK as he's known. He's my friend who suggested your name. So I just want to thank you. Thank you, KK, for organizing this. Okay, Russell. Let's start off with the question that everyone wants to know is, what is that you do with Ozone? You're a test pilot. Does that mean that you test the gliders the way certification is done? Or do you test the gliders for the production for a certain amount or for a certain thing that the glider is being designed for? Let's say it's designed for a lot of glide. Do you check that? Or what is it that you actually do?
Oh, well, we do the whole process. So we test gliders for performance, for safety, for handling, and then also we prepare them for certification. So the process starts normally when we get a new prototype. The way I would go about testing the wing is, first of all, looking at the structure of the wing in the air. So by that I mean if there's any creases anywhere,
okay,
or how the wing absorbs turbulence, and when there is a weakness in the sail, where that weakness appears, whether it's between the A and the B lines or the B and the C lines, and then we can trim accordingly to that. We also check for handling. We can trim the brakes for handling. And pretty early on in a prototype stage, we'll get straight into collapsing the wing as well, and stalling, and looking at the slow speed characteristics, the full speed characteristics, the solidity throughout the speed range, and how it behaves in fermeture, in collapses. Sorry, I was thinking in French then. So we'll get straight into that normally, because there's no point in doing a lot of work developing a wing and getting it just perfect, and then suddenly realize, oh well, it doesn't recover very well from a side collapse or a front collapse. So we have done it that way, and I don't like doing it that way. So we try and get into the safety aspects of the project very early on.
Right. So you will obviously be testing this. Do you test over water? Is this, or do you do a little cross-country flight with it to test this?
The cross-country flying is done sometimes. We've made a few cross-country flights with the Enzos and the competition wings, and sometimes with the Zenos. But with the other level wings, no, we don't do any cross-country flying. Where we fly here in the south of France is a very rocky thermic site, which is very good for us, because it means that we can always fly in turbulent air.
Right.
Which is really important to know, so that you really know the structure of your wing. But we test over the ground here. We don't test over water.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So if you're flying these wings and testing them, is there an inherent increase in confidence when you fly competitions, because you already know what you're doing with these wings? I mean, you're so comfortable with it. How does that?
Yeah, I think the fact that we're flying every day
Right.
and doing a lot of flying and doing quite extreme flying means that when we come to compete, although I know the Enzo, for example, inside out,
Right.
and I treat it with a lot of respect, and that doesn't go away. You don't become gung ho, you don't become more crazy. You understand the wing very well, so you know its limits and what you mustn't allow it to do. So you fly in a very defensive way. But I think the fact that I'm flying so regularly and doing lots of safety training all the time means that my bandwidth is more open to the cross country racing, or the strategy or the tactics that I'm using, and I don't have to worry so much about the glider behavior because I'm a little bit more on top of it.
That's a very
But it
interesting
doesn't
point.
really change. It doesn't change a huge amount. I think it gives me a professional test pilot has a few percentage more advantage just in bandwidth and confidence and being comfortable
Right.
on the wing.
Right.
But that also comes from flying almost every flyable day.
Right. That's the best part of where you are. That's what I've heard from your previous interviews. Uh, you've said a very important thing right now is although you know this, although you fly every time, but you treat the glider with respect and fly defensively. You don't get cocky about that.
No, the most important thing for us, and when I say us, it's the guys that I work with, Ozone, and we work as test pilots, Honouring and myself, and Luke as well, and we fly so much that the most important thing that we always have to consider, and one thing that I never try to push aside, is complacency,
Right.
because we make mistakes.
Right.
Last year I made two mistakes and got away with them. Ended up bruised ankle and a bruised bum, and walked away. Ono does the same. Luke does the same. We all make mistakes, and we're super trained and doing it all the time, but we make mistakes. And so you have to factor that into your flying.
Right.
You have to factor that into your decision making. You have to factor that in, especially if you're not flying every day. We feel it. I feel it when I had 2 weeks off from
Right.
flying. So no, I think as I get older, I'm much more aware of safety and I accept that we can't avoid mistakes, but it's really trying to mitigate that risk and keep it down. So whether we're flying beginner wings or competition wings, that respect doesn't go away. And
Right.
there is a myth. There is a myth within our community that because you fly an ENA wing, you're safe, but you're not.
Right.
When we go paragliding, we are not safe. We are putting ourselves into risk, and we have to. And no matter what wing you fly, as long as you're flying a wing that's suitable for your level and experience, that way you can mitigate the risk, but you can never make it safe.
Right. So this is what I've seen and experienced myself, that every time you get cocky, you end up with some kind of an incident. Like especially when you come back from an SIV, your fear is gone, and you said like, oh my God, I was flying so reluctantly, and now that I've done this to the wing, and I've thrown the wing, I've stalled the wing, I've collapsed the wing, and now I know I can just go and fly, and I'm just going to go to cloud base since I don't care about the conditions. And then there you have one incident. Or when you are uh, showing off, I do a little bit of that because I was doing it on low flying like a Vaga style, and then I didn't hurt myself, but I did dive in pretty close to the ground, and I didn't come out of that. So,
Mm.
and the reason why I tell this is because this is what happens in beer a lot. I'm talking about myself, and I'm also talking about my friends. When you go have a big flight, and you become a little bit cocky and say, okay, now I know this. Okay, I've got some achievement under I've done 100 kilometers, or I've been to the back mountains and come back. So flying defensively all the time is very important, and to stay away from ground suck. which is around everywhere.
Yeah,
Right. So
ground suck is on every hill in the world that I've ever seen. And some of it is well placed, and
right,
sometimes it's a little bit overcautious.
right,
But we all have to find our level. We all have to enjoy what we're doing. If we're not enjoying it, if we're stressing out because you're flying in marginal conditions, then there's no point in doing that. The risk reward factor is not enough. For me, it's always risk reward.
right,
When we fly here, we fly in very marginal conditions when most people are on the ground. And the only reason we can do that is because we fly every day. And
right,
even then, we know we're adding to our own risk. But for me now, it's come to a stage of it's extremely rough, it's extremely turbulent. Can I climb out to base and do some quality testing, whatever it is I'm trying to test or achieve that day? Or is it just rough and turbulent and I'm just going to end up ridge soaring in rough turbulent air, and I've done that enough in my life that I can't do quality testing in that sort of conditions.
yeah,
So I don't fly. So it's always risk reward. And
right,
I always use that formula to kind of, gauge my judgment of conditions when I think it's marginal. And what I've also learned and what experience teaches you is when you're concerned, when you're competent and you're concerned, there's a good reason for that concern, and you should really listen to it.
I'll listen to your
When you're
gut.
new
Yeah,
to the sport, it's hard to gauge because of the ground suck. It's hard to gauge all of the different information. But with time and experience, you start to learn yourself.
right. So that gut is something that you really listen to. You know that it's not a good day and you don't feel like flying. Don't fly. Just walk away.
Yeah, yeah. Gut is what we all go by, but often your gut is wrong. I've learned that.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I'm often wrong.
All right.
My wife reminds me every day.
Yeah. All right. Continuing on the same topic, then it's about risk and reward. And what happens nowadays is that everyone wants to fly a little bit aggressive, get a little bit advantage over others. I'm not talking about competition. I'm just talking about general flying. So it's come to a point where people want to look at two-liners as a progression, and they feel that if we have two-liners, then we really will achieve. Is that true? I feel that you need to fly with what you have and what your competence is really. But what's the difference between a two-liner and what would you advise?
Well, I think I think if you want to fly a two-liner for an ego reason, then I think that's exactly the wrong reason to fly a two-liner. I think there was a period, especially back in 2010, when the two-liners were new,
Right.
that or certainly new in the competition world, then it became something that you kind of had to have to be competitive, and all manufacturers started making two-liners, and competition pilots slowly, it took a season, but they slowly saw the reasoning behind it and went that way. But I think for most aspiring pilots now, with the quality of three-liners that are available, especially with the new BC type
Right.
steering systems, for me that's a huge game changer, and it closes the gap between two and three liners.
Right.
The just from I don't really know about other manufacturers, but just from our range, what we achieved with the M7 or LM7 and the Delta and the new Rush, which is about to come out, for me, it's totally transformed the glider and given not quite two-liner control, but very, very close to it. You've got 80% of the two-liner control.
Wow. The three lines.
So these new ACR risers, we call them, they're very, very efficient and can give that angle of attack control over throughout the speed range with a three-liner. So it's a very, very efficient system.
Right.
So I think that gap has narrowed, And also I'm super happy with the Delta and the Alpina and the new Rush and the M7 in terms of its piloting and its handling and its feel and the way you can accelerate it throughout the speed range. So you can have as much pleasure these days as you could get on a two-liner of a few years ago. The two-liners, I think, are only really interesting for pilots if they are serious cross-country pilots. They're cross-country flying machines. And if you're a serious cross-country pilot, you can still do that on the Deltas and Alpinas. If I lived and flew in beer,
Right.
I would fly a Delta and get just as much performance as if I was flying a Zeno or something, and have a bigger margin of safety.
Right.
So it also depends on. So it does depend on where you live and what your normal flying is. If you're doing more sort of flatland flying in the UK or somewhere a bit with softer conditions, you can maybe fly a slightly more advanced wing. Whereas if you're flying in extreme mountain conditions like beer, where the extra performance isn't actually of that much use, then there's just no point. So I think that the gap between three liners and two liners has narrowed with the new risers.
Right. And also there's a talk about two liners in the C category coming in, ENCs. So that's another progress. Where do you think this progress is going to end? We were talking before we got online that when I started flying, the gliders were pretty basic. That when I did my first P1, and you said I missed out the 90s development. Where do you think we are headed now? I mean, from there to now, it's a big change in everything.
It's hard to say because back then everyone was saying that that's it. We're not going to go any further with the technology, and each few years we proved that wrong. At the moment, we're getting to a limit, I would say, on line diameter and line strength. We can't safely go a huge amount less than we have already. And line drag is critical to performance, extremely critical. But we have to have built-in safety margins. And at the moment, it's an 8G safety margin, which I think we should
increase it. Or keep that,
and not reduce at all.
Right.
And so, in terms of pure line, given what's available on the market these days with the materials that are available, I think we're roughly about there.
Okay.
We can reduce total amount, but we'd have to increase diameter slightly. But I'm sure I'm wrong, and that there will be gains made somehow depending on the internal structure of the sail. In terms of the sail, the last few years have been all about making a cleaner airflow over the nose, over the front of the top surface, and ironing out all the wrinkles in the top. But a paraglider is still riddled with wrinkles.
Yeah.
So it's the aim is to always smooth that out and clean that out, and but we're kind of at the limits of sewing and top and cloth technology and making a double curvature work in cloth, which is very difficult without wrinkles.
Right. So also,
but where we go from next, I don't know. We've made some gains over the last few years. We've made good gains in performance and speed and stability and ease of use for the performance. But the gains are incremental at the moment.
Right.
In terms of pure performance, something that we can actually measure, and the way we measure is comparatively. So we do calm air gliding,
right?
Because moving air is interesting to see how a glider works in moving air, but when you're trying to quantify it, you can't.
Right.
So we need calm air to be able to quantify. And in calm air pure performance, we can measure in centimeters per second, averaged out over several glides, and we can see small incremental gains. But when we make a new model, we always try to increase the performance a significant amount. We do one particular glide every day, and if we can out to, if we can do a cone, which means, from the glider, from the pilot to the wing, and if we can gain a cone height in a kilometer, then we've got something that is significant performance gain for us.
So you're saying the distance between the pilot and the wing, and you
Yeah, so
fly
that's
around.
about 7 meters, let's say,
Right.
or
Okay. So
7
okay.
meters. So if in a kilometer we can gain 7 meters, that for us is a significant, gain, and it's measurable in meters, in centimeters per second.
And you're flying this in thermic air. You want to see if it climbs 7 meters in a kilometer.
No. We're doing this in calm air.
Calm air. Wow.
In calm air, yeah. So we're doing comparative glides to see who is gliding the best. And when we do this, we do it in the same harness. We do it with the same flying suit. We do it at exactly the same weight. And we repeat it because there's always random elements that you can't. The air is never the same, so we have to repeat until we get really a series of very good glides to be able to conclude performance.
That's an amazing.
But then what we see is that what we find is that the small differences that we find in calm air, when it turns into thermic air, it can relate to even more bigger gains. Because the wing converts a lift slightly better, and it dives through the sink slightly cleaner. So the small gains in calm air mean slightly bigger gains in thermic air.
Right. So that's very interesting. I didn't know about this test in calm air. I mean, that's amazing performance for a glider to climb in calm air, 7 meters. There's also a test.
Sorry. I think we've got a bit. Maybe you didn't understand what I meant. Is 7 centimeters per second.
Right.
Okay. Is how we can gauge performance increases.
Okay. All right.
And if a wing gains 7 meters compared to the one that we're comparing against, in a kilometer, then it's a good gain for us.
Okay, got that. Now it makes sense. All right. You also have spoken somewhere about a 25% speed bar test.
Yeah.
Is for the stability.
Pitch stability test, yeah.
Pitch stability. What exactly is that? Why is it 25%?
It's one of the tests of the EN norm. There's 24 tests, I believe.
Okay, yeah.
And one of them is the pitch stability test, where you accelerate the wing to full speed, and smoothly in 2 seconds you apply 25% brake. If the glider collapses, it's a fail. So the glider has to remain open without the wingtip or collapsing or the leading edge collapsing.
So we've always been told that not to use brakes with speed bar. So this is that test.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
to
build in some safety for people who might just still pull the brakes while with the speed bar.
Yes, and also it's a way of assessing the general pitch stability of the wing.
Right.
So it basically stops manufacturers from using really heavily cambered profiles.
Okay. Okay. Somewhere you had also mentioned, which is an interesting sentence, is the younger guys nowadays are making the older guys perform even harder. Is that because the designs of the wings are coming up faster, and the younger guys are getting in, learning with the newer wings, and that becomes their base learning? Or what is it? Is it that it's their flying style? Is something else, new thing is being taught?
I think it's just a natural progress in any sport, isn't it? The next generation comes through, and they've grown up. I mean, like when we started back in the 90s, to do a wing over was quite special. And then the SAT came along and we all learned to do the SAT, and it was all very much self-learning. Whereas a 16-year-old now just walks in and says, "Oh, twisted infinite. Oh, that looks easy. I'll go and do it." So it's very normalized for the young guys.
Yeah.
And I think, we're getting into the stage now where a lot of the young kids, I'm especially talking about France, because this is where there is a lot of them.
Right.
And I see them a lot. But now all the second generation pilots, so the pilots our age and slightly older, have had their kids and they've grown up to teenagers and they've got into flying.
Right.
So it's these guys coming through that have, maybe had their parents as competition pilots or keen paragliding pilots. So it's very normal for them. They come through and they want to be good. So they train hard. They've got good glider control because they've been ground handling since they were 11,
Right.
and they're keen and motivated, and they up the level. And so yeah, there's lots of very very good pilots knocking around, and that pushes everything up.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing nowadays. Even with cross country, or when you have the younger generation come in and do phenomenally well because they've learned, and there's better explanation and better understanding, and also as a community we evolve together. And you're right. So there is a change that we see. Okay,
Yeah, I
coming
think
to
it's been seen in other sports as well,
yeah,
especially sort of more extreme sports where they're relatively new and people are learning it, and there's not that many people who do it in the world. There's not that much information. It's quite a slow learning process, but the next generation get the benefits of of the last 20 years.
that's right. That and like you rightly said, the second generation is already having kids who are teenagers now or getting into
Yeah,
the early 20s, and they're
yeah,
into it.
yeah.
I wanted my daughter to fly too. She did her P1, but now she's 18 and she is going to probably take it up in a couple of years. That'll be
Yeah.
fun. Okay,
More
I'm
stressful.
yeah, it is. Yeah. When she was doing her when she was doing her P1, I was hanging around with her, and finally the instructors told me, please leave. We will handle her. Just to hang around here. I had to leave. Yeah. So, Russell, I want to get into a question that's been sent by KK, who's your fan. He says, I'm a big fan of yours, and thank you for the humility and patience only a true champion can inspire. So he sent four questions.
That's
Let me
good.
read one question. He says, you've spoken about the samurai theory, the elements of flow in your interview with XE Mag. Can you speak more about that and how we can go into a stage-wise learning application to individual and community development?
The samurai theory has followed me around. I gave a talk to a British squad, I think it was, about 10 years ago. And just before doing it, I was reading this book about samurais, and it, it threw up this five ring theory, which was
Right.
an old samurai training method. And all I did, I use it as an analogy for paragliding. So I'm no expert whatsoever on samurai five ring theory. I read it in a book about 10 years ago, and it's followed me around ever since. But what I did at the time for that talk was I related the five. So the five ring theory is that there are there are five elements that you have to master to be a
Samurai.
master,
Yeah.
and they were earth, wind, fire, and water. And you can use analogies of whatever you want to fill those four rings. And I think I used meteorology,
Right.
glider control, strategy for competitions, and your mental attitude, or something
Right.
like that. Um, but the most important thing about the samurai theory was to achieve mastership, you had to have control of the fifth ring.
Right.
And the fifth ring was the ability to forget all of the other four rings
Yeah.
when you were in the
The
zone.
zone.
So basically, it's a modern way of saying when you're in the zone, where
Right.
you're thinking on another level to the point where it's all subconscious. It's all working in
Right.
your
Right.
subconscious, and you're just in the flow. So it's
Right.
that flow state, and I think that's what it was relating to. So no, I can't really give any solid sort of framework to work towards the five
Right.
rings theory. But it's worth it's interesting having a quick Google and having a look at it,
Yeah.
and and see how you can relate it to your own flying.
But I think I related. Uh, in fact, we did a few episodes on the podcast itself about how. to really not think about anything else but flying. And we give examples of how we get ready. The getting ready for flying starts about a day before. When you have everything in sorted out, your equipment is there, you checked everything, you go to the takeoff site and you put everything together, make sure that your system of getting ready is getting everything ready, and you don't worry about anything once you're in the air. And once you're in the air and your glider control, your thoughts, everything is all second nature. And only thing that you're thinking about is, okay, what next? Where do I go next? A little pitch and roll and other movements. You're really not worried about. Like when I started flying, I did have a fear for stalls, and I used to always like look at the glider. And my initial days of my flying was really affected for about a year because I was always worried. And
Yeah.
so you can't fly. That's not the flow. You're not in the flow. You're not in the zone. So you need to sort those things out, the clutter around, to make sure that you're just flying. And there are a lot of examples that we have given. So yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I
And
don't think beginners. I think beginner pilots. You're certainly not in that flow state. You're not in that
yeah,
zone. I remember when I first started flying, I felt every little lump and bump in the air,
right.
every little minute little bump. I was like, "What's that?"
Yeah,
And 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 it would make my heart stop literally
yeah, yeah,
when the glider unloaded slightly.
yeah,
So I think as beginner pilots, you're extremely sensitive. You're more sensitive to the wing than when you've been flying
yeah,
for 25 years.
yeah,
You kind of you get so used to the feeling that it filters all out. But new pilots feel every lump and bump, which is
yeah.
why it's not a good idea to fly in very turbulent conditions or on a wing with too much feedback.
That's
So,
right.
but getting into that stove, the flow state as or the fifth ring takes experience and it takes time. And that's the beautiful thing about our sport is that, it's quite easy to do, but very difficult to master. And it's a road. In fact, you don't master this sport. It's just a road that you go
That's right.
down and you just keep trying to get better and better
Better and better.
and safer and making more sensible decisions and making the right piloting decisions, because
Right.
it's a balance of having the fun and the extreme of paragliding that it gives you, but it also is aviation. And so you have to treat it as such and become a complete pilot. And
Right.
but there's very few complete pilots in the world. It's something that we're all on that journey towards.
I mean, these are precious words, Russell, without really making it sound very serious. But for me, this is important because coming from somebody who flies every day, like yourself, who's saying that we still haven't mastered it. We still take it defensively. You started by saying that I take flying defensively, and it's all about the flow. But you also tend to make mistakes, even though you fly so often. And that's the message that we want to send across to our listeners also, that that's what Russell is thinking. Imagine what we are doing. We don't fly regularly. We have our day jobs and we have families, and you know how that whole clutter works. Although we
Yeah.
try and get as much as we can, but for us in India now, imagine now it's going to be monsoon, so 4 months there's going to be no flying. And here you're saying that if you took a 2 week break, you come back, and for you need to get back to that. So that's a very impressive lesson for everyone. I'm sure people are listening to that. So thank you very much for that. Uh, I want to jump directly into the gliding part of it, but before we go there, I want to ask you a question, and I've heard this before from you. Is about fear.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm
How,
just moving.
sure. I've heard that even in turbulent air, when you have your glider in competitions, you do feel fear. I mean, somebody who's flying much as you still feels
Oh,
fear, and you've done your acro flying. And what do you want to
yeah.
say to our
No,
because
no,
I'm sure
fear.
everyone fears it, everyone feels it, but
Yeah, I mean,
very few
fear.
accept it.
Fear control, or sorry, fear awareness is very much something part of our sport. Everyone should be scared of paragliding,
Right.
full stop,
Okay.
because there's always a danger on
Right.
takeoff. And once you're in the air, there's always the turbulence and the wind and all those factors that you have to take aware of. And I think what happens is, or certainly I can only really speak for myself and my own personal experiences, but when I started flying, the first few years I was full of fear. It was fear of the unknown. I didn't
Right.
really, like you, I didn't know about collapses and I didn't know about stalls, and I was, back in the day, no one really understood it very well. So I was always worried about ending up in the sail. And then as I became more and more experienced and I had more and more hours under my belt, and I started to understand, okay, no, that's normal feedback. It's normal that the wing feels like it's just emptying but not collapsing. And that's a normal feel. Once you can rationalize all those fears, it becomes less and less fearful.
Right.
And after I'd been flying for 10 years, I suddenly realized, my God, I love flying. The less fear I had, the more enjoyment I had.
Right.
And nowadays, I've totally rationalized fear. I understand um, when it's correct to be scared and when it's not correct to be scared. And it's very beneficial because I know when I start feeling scared, there's a good reason for it. It's not because there's an irrational fear. There's a I may not be aware of it, but there is a real risk. So I think now it's much easier the way I can control my own personal fear. Yeah. But
Okay.
I
So
understand it better and I can act on it better as well.
that's the key. So you need to fly, understand what's rational fear and what's irrational fear, and
Yeah,
work on that.
yeah.
Yeah, but it's amazing to know that even someone like you does feel fear, and it's important to acknowledge that
I
and to
think
accept it. And
it's really important, Sajid. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, I work and fly with the best pilots,
right,
some of the best pilots in the world. You know, with Honor Ahmad and Luc Armand, and we fly together all the time, every day, and we all experience fear when there's turbulent conditions, when there's dodgy landings, where
right,
there's we can put ourselves in situations where fear can come in
right,
quite strongly, and whenever that happens, we always have a word with ourselves, because we
right,
can't do that on a daily basis.
right. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so now comes to the main question, which a lot of people will be interested to know from you, and I've got a few people asking me to ask you this. It's all about the lines, the gliding. Climbing is one thing, but gliding is the other important part of flying. Uh, Choosing the right lines. I mean, it's again an art. It's not a template that you can say that okay, you choose this, this is where you go, and that's how I work out my line. But uh, is there anything that a a pilot who's not into competition, but let's say a recreational pilot who's flying beer, is there a basic thing for him to look out? Is it the weather? Is it any other cues that they look at flying, or I mean gliding, or if they find that they're sinking in about 5-6 meters per second, it's time for them to move. What would you say to that?
So hang on, what situation are we in here? Are we flying in the ridge in Beer? Are we in flatlands? Where are we?
We don't have much of flatland, so let's talk about beer. I think that's where most of
Okay.
our audience is.
Well, Beer is a long ridge, and so that's a pretty obvious general line to fly in.
Right.
Um, but obviously, you'll have the cues and the normal trigger points, and you would just. My philosophy on gliding is always, and I've seen it in competition time and time and time and time again. Competitions are great because you can see what works and what doesn't work, and gliding, and how the difference between gliding lines as well, just from being 300 meters apart, can be monstrously different at the other end of the when you reach the next thermal. It can mean that one of you doesn't even reach the next thermal.
Right.
So the air has these fingers of, it seems like everything flows along the wind line in fingers.
Okay.
What I've sort of worked out, or what I've guessed at from doing a lot of competition. So if you suddenly find yourself on a nice line, good air, so you're not sinking too much, if you can align yourself downwind or upwind, you can stay on that line sometimes. It's not always the case. It's always
Okay.
random.
Yeah.
But sometimes the airflow can align that way, and you can get a much more buoyant line. And that may go on for a long while or a short while. And then it's a case of finding the other good bit of air. So
Right.
often when you're gliding, you're taking the path of least resistance. So if there's a
Right.
cumulus forming, if there's, the obvious signs, which
Right.
we all can see, um, milky, anything that suggests there's lift, you go that way. The closest one to you, preferably, that's roughly in the direction that you want to go. So, but don't be scared of taking a 45-degree line offline, or even bigger, to get to the next bit of lift. Um, and then if you can find yourself in a very nice area, try and align yourself up or downwind. If you find yourself in very heavy sink, you have to make the assessment of whether that's because you're just about to go into a thermal,
Right.
or whether you're just on a bad line. Um, if you believe that you're just on a bad line, then turn 45 degrees, left or right, your guess is as good as mine.
Okay.
And try and get yourself until you're in less heavy sink, and then go back online to wherever you are gliding. These are the basic kind of rules for gliding. Basically, is if you're just getting hammered by sink for more than, let's say, 20 seconds, make a move, make a decision,
Right.
left or right, 45 degrees, get away from there and see what's better. It may be worse the way you go, but it's better than just slogging a dead horse
Right.
going in the same direction. So be ready to weave around and move around. And I've said before, but to be efficient, you have to be inefficient. You have to.
Right.
So sometimes it's like when you're thermaling and you're in the core, or you think you're in the core, and you actually got to, maybe the core's to your left, and if you do a little search out to the left, you get a better core and up you go. But the next time you do the same thing, it would have been to the right, and you go to the left more and you lose out,
Right.
and you have to come back into the core. So by that, I mean that you have to sniff around, you have to search, you have to keep looking for better. And that's the same whether you're climbing the thermal or whether you're gliding. And to do that, you need to move around and accept that, okay, sometimes it's not going to work out your way.
Perfect. So 45-degree is something that you should look at, and I think that's something that we all should
Yeah,
consider and move out
yeah.
from
I
that
think
area.
if I go on a glide and I'm in heavy sink for 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 25 seconds. After 25 seconds, I'll be
Yeah.
cursing myself for making a slow decision,
Right.
because it's making these decisions
Right.
that gives us efficiency. But after a certain amount of time, if I don't think it's a thermal in front of me, I will shift my line left or right, 45 degrees roughly, to wherever I'm going, to try and find something better, anything better than what I was in.
Right. What is the strongest climb that you've got in, let's say, beer? Have you experienced that in the springtime, or what has been your feeling?
My strongest ever climb.
Yeah.
The strongest climb I've ever had was 12 meters per second on the
Wow.
Abinger, and that was in Saint André les Alpes, and it was super smooth, like ridiculously super smooth.
A 12-meter per second was smooth.
12 meters, yeah.
Wow.
I had a 10-meter once, and I've had an 8-meter once,
Okay.
but they're the three strongest climbs I've had in 25 years of flying.
Wow.
I hear people say they fly in 10 meters to 8 meters regularly, but it doesn't happen that often. I think it does more in the North Alps in Fish, and certainly in your part of the world in Beer,
Right.
it will kick off strong. But in most of the flying that I've ever done, a 4 meter, 5 meters is a good thermal.
Right. Yeah.
The strong
That's
ones
good.
are very,
Yeah.
very rare. Yeah.
All right. Cool. So we got the gliding part done, which was pretty popular. Uh, in terms of loading of the
Sorry,
wing.
Sajid,
Yes.
one more thing about the gliding as
Sure.
well
Sure.
is speed to fly, obviously.
Oh yeah.
It's
Right.
gliding at the right speed for whatever it is you want to do. If it's the last final glide of the day, you can slow the glider down. You can use your risers just to keep it going as slow as possible, basically, if you're in good air. Whereas if you're charging in wind or heavy sink, then we have to be on the bar. and we
Okay.
have to. That's where two-liners become advantageous because we've got control over the angle of attack all of the time, which means that we can accelerate as fast as possible or as fast as we want to go as for our speed to fly, and keep the wing open without having to come off the speed bar and back on again, and really slow the glider down and make it accelerate again, which is all inefficient. If
Right.
you can maintain the speed that you need to be going at, you will glide more efficiently as well. We've seen big differences in competition where pilots, if they hit a little bit of turbulence and they come off their speed bar and hit the Bs at the same time, then the glider climbs backwards and then pitches forwards,
Right. You lose
and
the
they
height.
lose
Yeah.
time and glide.
Right.
If you can just do the enough input, the minimum input necessary to keep
Right.
the wing open, the glider will be flying on its best, most efficient glide slope.
That's
And
that's
another
wonderful.
thing I do to keep it really simple, because I'm not big on instruments, is if you don't know how fast you have to fly into wind, what is the speed? How do you know your speed to fly? What I try to do, I don't know the answer to that, by the way, but what I try to do is just to always maintain roughly, if I'm going into wind and I want to glide at my maximum glide above the ground, I try and maintain 40 kilometers an hour on my
Okay.
GPS,
Okay.
because that's roughly my trim speed. So I roughly want to be traveling across the ground at 40 kilometers an hour. And I find that is roughly about the right speed to fly. That's how I use speed to fly. I don't use the complicated computers or the GPSs so much, and it seems to work just about right. So it's a
All
very
right.
simple way of judging how fast to fly upwind.
So you're flying upwind and you have, but you still try to maintain 40 kilometers.
Yeah.
Try that.
If
That
that
won't
means I
work
have
for
to be
me.
at full bar, and
Yeah.
if it means that I can only get to 35 kilometers at full bar, it
Yeah.
means that full bar is my best speed to speed.
Ah, okay, cool.
Oh, yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
you. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Perfect. Wow. So next time I go to beer in August, in October, I'm gonna try that again. Cool.
Yeah. No guarantee that it will work or it's the most efficient, but it's what I use.
No, man, that's the. I mean, yeah, I've been playing with it to see what works, and sometimes without bar it works better, and sometimes with 25% it works better. We try to keep that as simple as possible and try to
Yeah.
get the most out of it. Yes.
Mm.
Also, where we fly in calm state, like I was telling you earlier, here we have a stronger wind factor, so the thermals are always slanty, and so we need to have the downwind stretch a little bit further and just go on, keep on going and back. So we have to use the speed bar at times when you're going in
Push back
upwind.
into
So
wind.
yeah, yeah. All right. So the next question was that you're not very fond of instruments, but you already answered that. So now I understand how you work with it, and I also like to keep it as simple as possible. But we have our friends over here who got all sorts of gadgetry happening. But yeah, well, hey guys, if you
Yeah,
guys are
no,
listening,
the new generation of instruments are working really nicely
right,
now.
right,
And I have an UDI which has a full map, and
right,
there's lots of other instruments out there that are coming out which are looking really good on tablet format.
right,
So I'm not completely archaic. I do like the idea of modern instrumentation. But when I compete, I only really use it for competitions because I don't do
right,
a great deal of cross country flying. But when I compete, I'm really more focused on other pilots and the tactic and the strategy and trying to maintain my gaggle position and making cross country decisions, racing decisions, rather than focusing on exactly what my glide ratio is, because it doesn't really matter. It is what it is, you know. So,
right.
and we can't affect it. It's not like a hang glider where we can really control and affect our speed and our glide. On our paraglider, we don't quite have that
Right.
range really or efficiency.
All right, cool. So I'm going to now come to the last part of our podcast, Russell. It's going to be a part where I want to talk about our younger generation that's coming to fly. Uh, People who are probably club pilots who are now going into beer and flying. And there are a few questions for them. And we as a community actually in India, we've come together. We have a lot of groups. We talk to each other. This podcast series is also part of education and talking to people. And what we've realized is a lot of people really don't want to come and talk to others. In fact, they don't want to form a community. They just want, sometimes they don't find friends and they try to fly alone and try to copy what others are doing. And that's not really nice. We want to disseminate this. So there are a few questions that I want to ask you with respect to them is what is the right mix of the progress versus the risk? We all know that to move from an A to B to a C, or to move your game from rich flying to beer flying, there has to be a little bit of risk involved in everything that you learn in the sport.
Yeah.
What would you advise the younger generation, or even
I
us
would
for that matter?
I would say that my advice is to absorb every piece of information that you can. Listen to every instructor, listen to every podcast, read every magazine you can. Just absorb as much information as you can so that you're armed with everything that you possibly can be. And then you need to just practice and give it time and just accept that this is a sport that's going to take me time. I'm going to grow with this sport. This is a sport for life. It's not a,
Absolutely.
it's something that we do. It's, in fact, I don't like even calling it a sport because you can take up any other sport you can think of pretty much. You could take up tennis. And if
Right.
you're not good at tennis, it doesn't really matter. If you're not good at paragliding, it's really, really serious. And
Right.
it's serious for yourself and for your family and your loved ones.
Right.
So you can only go about paragliding seriously if you say, right, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this to the best of my ability. And you put everything into it. I think the sport, I think paragliding just deserves that respect.
No,
And you
that's right.
have to treat it in that sense. So if you treat it in that sense, you accept that this is a lifelong journey that I'm going down. And you can get off this bus anytime you want. But whilst you're on the bus, you've got to keep practicing, keep progressing. You have to accept that in order to progress, like you say, you have to expose yourself to risk. That's the reality. So let's mitigate how much risk we expose ourselves to by being ready for each next stage.
Right.
So this is why I think once you've got your school license and you're gaining experience, start off ridge soaring just to get used to your equipment, used to the way the glider feels, working on the speed bar, and all of these things that you can do to start to learn how to fly your wing. Once you've got 30, 50 hours or even 10 hours, it depends on the individual, then you want to start thinking about SIV or pilotage courses where you can start to push your glider a little bit more. But more importantly, it's not about pushing your glider, it's about pushing yourself a little bit more and
Right.
learning about yourself. You need to learn early on in this sport what your G tolerance is, for example.
Right.
There's no point in having your first ever big incident in the air without ever experienced G
Right.
uh, because paragliders can, as you know, generate and can generate a lot of G very quickly. And if you're not physiologically ready for that, you can freeze, you can black out, and you can kill yourself very easily. Where, all it requires is a bit of opposite brake and you'll pull yourself out. But these are things that you have to learn about yourself, and you have to do that in a safe environment, which is why we've got a plethora of fantastic SIB instructors out there doing a good job.
Right.
So that should be, part of the next stage. And once you've got SIV under your belt, and again, SIV is one of those things where it's not a tick box where it's done
Right.
once and that's it, done, I'm never going to do it again. It's something you have to train. It's something you have to practice. It's something you have to, so in aviation, it's all about training and practice and training and practice and training and practice. And paragliding is even more critical because our gliders tend to collapse every now and then.
Right.
Horrible air. So we need to be prepared for that. And so we need to train for that. And once we've got some experience, then we can start flying in stronger thermic conditions, active flying, really controlling the glider and going on from there. So if you're a recent club pilot and you've got 3 hours under your belt, enjoy the journey, but don't rush. Don't rush. Take your time, step by step.
Perfect. That's a very valid point. And also SIV is just not one time, like you said, it's a tick box. You got to do several SIVs till you really get used to and comfortable stalling your wing, going into a spiral dive comfortably. I think that would be the key to really feel the cheese.
Yeah, I mean, from my own experience, I did my first SIV course with the wonderful jockey back in '96, I think,
Wow.
and I then did my second one, and I actually realised on my second one was when I actually learnt a little bit,
Okay.
because the first one for me was a fear control exercise. It was, how am I going to react in a collapse? How am I going to react in a spiral? Um, So I was more worried about me the first time, whereas the second time, because I knew I could do it, because I knew I had done it, and I got through it okay, and I was compos mentis, and I didn't black out or freeze.
Right.
The second time I did an SIV course, I actually learned, and then the third time I learned even more. I think when I started with Ozone, I thought I knew it already, but it actually took me over a year to learn the full story. To properly
Wow.
learn the full storm took
Wow.
me a year, if not slightly longer.
Wow. So
So there's lots of learning for all of us still to come. But
so that's multiple SIVs is the way to go.
yeah, but it's how you balance it with your, the pressure of life, the pressure of
Right.
family. There's
Right.
other trips that you want to do. So
Right.
I mean, ideally, in an ideal world, with all the free time in the world, you'd do an SIV course a year. But
Right.
for many, that's not a reality. But if you could do one every few years at least, then it's better than not doing them at all.
Perfect. Okay, let me get into another question, very direct question. Total flying weight, should we be flying at the higher level or the mid level? So if your total wing loading is 100, 80 to 100, should we be at 90, 95, or close to 100?
Good question. It depends on the wing. It depends on the wing. I can only really speak for Ozone wings because I don't
Okay.
have a great deal of experience flying others. But well, just for an example, this is how we built the Delta or the
Right.
Rush or the Buzz, any of these wings, is we start off with the ML prototype. Now,
Okay.
the ML has a weight range between 85 and 105.
Okay.
Now, Ono, he's lighter than me. He flies, his natural all up weight is 93 kilos.
Right.
Luke and I are about the same, and we hook in with our testing equipment at about 96, 97 kilos. And we develop the ML for us at that load. We get it handling right. We make sure it's solid, it's speed range, everything. We do all the fine tuning at those weights. We only really fly at the extreme of the weight ranges when we start to do the work for certification.
Okay.
And they work perfectly nicely at the extreme of their loads. I mean, at the top load for sure. At the bottom ends, I don't recommend flying wings on the bottom of the weight range. They still work, they're still fine. But if you're at the bottom of the rate range, you should really be on the size down.
Okay. Right.
But anywhere I would say in the middle of the range and up is fine. So for a Delta 4 medium large, 95 to 100, I'd say is probably about optimum.
Okay. Makes sense. I've been
Yeah.
flying with 7 liters of ballast on my Route 2
Yeah.
before I moved on to the Volt 2. But yeah.
But just on that note, if I went to beer and took off in beer, I would happily throw another 10 kilos on and
Yeah.
be,
Be, yeah, be on the higher
105
end.
right on the top.
Yeah.
So it depends where you're
Flying. Yeah.
flying as well. If I was flying in the UK, I would be in the middle of the rate range, so I've got good sink rate in the relatively weak thermals. I think the myth what many people think is that the wing is not going to be handling very nice. It's not going to be fast enough, but it's perfectly good in the middle of the weight range. You do gain a bit of speed and precision in the brakes by adding loading,
Right.
but you don't add hugely to overall efficiency, I wouldn't say.
Okay. Cool. What would you say are the main or the three maneuvers that any pilot should know to really have the glider control uh, before they go on to going to really thermic flying?
I would say that before flying in thermals, and you want to do three maneuvers, I would start off with spiral dive. I would
Okay.
introduce yourself, obviously in a controlled
Right.
manner, with an
Over water.
instructor, with water, and
Right.
so on. Or failing that, you have to start off gently,
Right.
but you should introduce yourself to G forces.
Right.
Because it's vitally important that you understand your own body. We all have different
Right.
tolerance to G. I notice on a daily basis that my tolerance changes on a daily
Okay.
basis. It depends on your hydration and diet and how fit you are. Well, it's not necessarily how fit you are, because some extremely fit athletes have zero G tolerance.
Right.
So I would say that you should learn your G tolerance.
Okay.
And if you know that you have a very low G tolerance, then you need to be aware of that.
Right.
And you need to be aware of then how to stop
Right.
G from developing. So I would say learning the spiral is quite nice because it teaches you about G force, and it teaches you about leaning away and pulling the opposite brake to stop the glider from spiraling. Right. So controlled entrance, controlled exit without too much energy is quite a nice exercise.
Right.
And then I would say the next two most important maneuvers to experience, because we're not mastering anything at this stage, we're just experiencing them. Again, done on an SIV or pilot type course with a safety boat over water, would be the side collapse and the front collapse.
Okay.
Because they're the most common ones. If you're going to work on just one of them, I'd work just on the side collapse.
Okay.
Because the side collapse is probably the most common type of collapse that you will take.
Right.
You have to accept that you will take collapses in your paragliding career. So get used to it and get on that bus and start practicing, and just getting used to the glider diving down towards the horizon, and the feeling of G and the way you recover, and all of that's very good experience. Right. It's much better to experience that for the first time above water with a safety boat than 50 meters below the launch at Beer.
Okay. Cool. Perfect. I think we've come to the end of this, Russell. I've asked all the questions. I'm sure there's a lot more to ask you, but I don't want to take more of your time. I know it's an evening for you back home. And is before we go, is there anything you want to tell the listeners in any way? Anything about flying, design, Ozone, anything?
What can I say? Well, yeah, I mean, other than the fact that we're working our hardest to always try and make new products, make new things, improve things.
Right.
The process is sometimes slow, but we're getting there step by step.
Right.
We always try to do our best. I'm very happy with our current range of wings.
Right.
And I think that the whole paragliding industry is getting better. The designers know more now than they did 15 years ago, and there's lots of good wings out there that you can fly. I'd say the most important thing for me that I'd like to say is stay on safe wings, stay on lower rated wings, low aspect ratio wings. For me, the biggest difference is aspect ratio. You can kind of forget EN certification numbers, letters, but look at aspect ratio, because aspect ratio is harder to manage in very strong air, and so keep down to a low aspect ratio, be really progressive in your learning, but be progressive.
Right.
Always push yourself. Always
Small
try and
steps.
learn. Use every flight as a learning tool to
Right.
try something new. Use your speed bar. Tighten your turn. Learn the point where the wingtip starts to peel back. Learn the point where the glider's just about to collapse and you can catch it on the brakes. Learn the feelings, absorb the feelings. So try and use every flight as a learning experience and always try and push yourself and do it step by step, progressively, and never stop learning.
Perfect. That's really good advice, and I'm sure our listeners are going to take that. And building G's is really important, and it helps you, gives you a lot of confidence once you have a good tolerance and an understanding of what G's can do, and you can survive that. So yeah, Russell, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming online. It's and giving your time in the evening over there.
My pleasure.
And really, really thank you very much. I hope you come to India soon once this COVID situation
I would
improves.
love to come back to India. I had such a good time in India, and I thoroughly enjoyed the place. I have nothing but good memories of India.
Awesome.
I
When
would
was the
love
last
to
time
go
you
back.
were in India?
It was the last time I was here. Sorry,
In India.
in India. The last time I
Yeah.
was in India was we for the World Cup in 2015.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah,
6 years.
six
Wow.
years ago. Yeah, and I had just great memories from that period. It was a really fantastic week. One
Yeah.
of the best weeks. Well, unfortunately, we didn't have the best weather whilst
Weather.
we were there.
Yeah.
We didn't get the really good condition. I had a couple of very good days, but
Right.
never proper classic beer. And
Right.
we had one day that we couldn't actually see anything.
Wow.
It was just so much smog low down that the task was cancelled
Then,
because of visibility.
oh, the inversion must be.
Oh, the
Yeah.
inversion was super heavy, yeah. Um, so we didn't have the best flying, but I had one of the best flying trips I've ever had. Really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah,
Well, we really look forward to you coming to India, and I hope you also get some time to come to Kamshit, our home site over here. Love to have a flight with you over here, but definitely be Russell. Thank you so much. Really
thank
appreciate you
you.
coming online, and we'll connect with you. If there are any more questions, I'll email them to you if any of the listeners write
Sure,
back to me, and
sure.
really appreciate it. So thank you very much, guys, for listening to this episode. I'm really excited for this, and I really hope you guys enjoyed it. And till the next time, we'll see you. And if you have any questions, please write to me at emailsajid@gmail.com, and we'll take it up. And I'll ask Russell if there's any more questions that you want, and we'll come back to you on the next episode. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.